Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into 1937 Australia today. A year, when the Great Depression was still really gripping the country, and we're going to explore two really different crimes, but both happened that same year, and I think reveal quite a bit about life down under.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. You've got that backdrop of economic hardship, and this real social change happening. And these two cases, I mean, totally different in nature, but they really highlight, those tensions of the time, all the complexities.
Definitely. And get this one is a murder that just shook this tiny town in rural New South Wales, and the other is this daring heist targeting, wait for it, wheat. Happened all the way over in Perth on the other side of the continent.
Yeah, and the wheat heist. I mean, that's particularly interesting. I mean, especially when you think about how important wheat was to Australia's economy back then,
Yeah.
especially during those tough years.
Yeah. Okay, so let's start with the murder. Imagine yourself in Carcoar, New South Wales. It's a small town, real tight-knit community, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business. And then, bam! 22-year-old Mary Agnes Leary is found dead on Angalong Station. It's a huge sheep station just outside of town. Can you imagine the shock?
Murders were rare in rural Australia.
Yeah.
And this one, it must have sent ripples through that whole community.
Yeah, our sources describe Mary as a well-respected young woman. So this wasn't just some, random crime. This really shook people to their core.
And the inquest, led by coroner R.G. Melville, they didn't waste any time in ruling out an accident. This was murder. So who did it?
Well, that's where things get interesting. The investigation, it quickly focused on George Mugliston Thornton. He had some sort of connection to Mary. And the police, they suspected a deliberate act, but remember, this is the 1930s. This is rural Australia, so resources are limited. I mean, forensics is practically non-existent. Yeah, how did they solve cases back then? It seems almost impossible.
Right. They relied a lot on witness testimony, and whatever little physical evidence they could find. It was really a matter of piecing together a story based on circumstance and the accounts of people who knew Mary and Thornton. I mean, can you imagine trying to build a case with such limited tools?
It's mind-boggling. And it makes you wonder, right, how many cases maybe went unsolved or had, totally different outcomes because of those limitations.
Oh, definitely a thought-provoking question. Makes you really appreciate, I think, what we have today, with our modern techniques.
So Thornton was committed to trial at the Bathurst Supreme Court. It was like a prominent regional court at the time. But here's where we're going to leave you hanging for just a minute. We'll get back to Thornton's fate. But first, let's jump across the country to Perth, where a completely different kind of drama was unfolding.
Get ready for a daring heist. This crime targeted one of Australia's most precious commodities, wheat. All right, so picture this.
Yeah.
It's September 1937 in Perth, right? And nearly 400 bags of wheat just vanish. Poof. Gone. Can you imagine?
400 bags. That's a lot of wheat. Who could even, I mean, how do you even pull something like that off?
Well, the finger was pointed at three Italian nationals.
Yeah.
And this detail, I think, is really interesting. One of them, Italo Regali, he's described as like a marine collector.
A marine collector. What would a marine collector, I mean, what's he doing mixed up in a wheat robbery? Doesn't exactly add up, does it?
It does raise eyebrows, doesn't it? It hints at, maybe some unexpected connections or even a level of organization, that goes beyond just some simple opportunistic theft.
Yeah. And our sources tell us the victim was Westralian Farmers Ltd, a cooperative, right, representing all these small-scale farmers. So this wasn't just stealing wheat. This was impacting, actual livelihoods.
Exactly. And don't forget, this is 1937, Great Depression. It's still casting its shadow over Australia. Wheat. I mean, that was a vital commodity. This theft, it would have sent shockwaves through, that whole agricultural community.
So what happened? Did they catch the culprits?
The trial, it took place at the Perth Police Court, September 23rd. Two of the men, they were convicted. But get this, Italo Regali, their marine collector, he was acquitted.
Wait, acquitted? How was there just not enough evidence or was there something else going on?
That's where things get, even more fascinating. Our sources, I mean, they don't really go into detail about the trial itself, but it's worth thinking about the context, right? The social context. Italians back then, a lot of them worked these really labor-intensive jobs and they often faced, prejudice, discrimination. Could that have played a role maybe in Regali's acquittal?
It's possible, isn't it? It's hard to imagine, really, that those social tensions wouldn't have, somehow affected the legal system, especially during a time like that, such a
Sure.
turbulent period.
Yeah, and we can't forget about those economic pressures, right?
Yeah.
The depression, I mean, it drove up crime rates all over. Agricultural goods, they were easy targets for theft, black market resale. Could this wheat robbery, I mean, could it have been part of something bigger?
It's like this domino effect, right? Economic hardship, it leads to desperation, desperation leads to crime, and then suddenly you've got all these criminal networks exploiting vulnerabilities. So on one hand, we've got this murder mystery kind of hanging in the balance back in Carcoar, and on the other, we've got this wheat heist with like this unexpected twist and maybe even, a controversial acquittal.
Yeah, and what really strikes me is how both these cases, I mean, on opposite sides of the country, completely different crimes, but they both reveal something about law enforcement in rural Australia, the challenges they faced.
You're right. Small towns like Carcoar, they had such limited resources, right? A few officers, a magistrate, and that's about it.
Exactly. They had to rely on those more traditional methods, witness accounts, circumstantial evidence. And remember, this is way before, all that fancy forensic stuff. Can you imagine trying to solve a murder with those limitations?
It makes you appreciate, like you said, how far we've come in terms of, our investigative techniques and all that.
Oh, absolutely. And then you've got the Regali acquittal. You do have to wonder, if public perception of Italians, especially during that time, if that might have, somehow tipped the scales in that trial.
Yeah. And then, like you said, the economic context, the depression pushing people to crime, and those agricultural goods like wheat becoming prime targets. It makes you think about the ripple effects, right, of economic hardship and how it can just like create these opportunities for criminal activity. So we've got two cases here on the surface, totally unrelated. But when you dig a little deeper, you start to see these common threads.
Absolutely. Limitations of rural law
Yeah.
enforcement. You've got the social dynamics of the time and of course, the impact of economic hardship.
It's amazing, isn't it, how these two seemingly totally random events, can offer such a glimpse into this specific moment in Australian history. It really makes you think, like, what if these cases, what if they happened today? Would they even be investigated the same way? Would anything be the same?
It is fascinating to think about this. And imagine, like, the Carcoar murder happening now. You'd have, forensic teams everywhere, DNA analysis, the whole, like, CSI treatment. I mean, would it even have taken them, this long to figure out who to focus on?
And the wheat heist, 400 bags of wheat. Could someone even pull that off today? With
Well,
all the surveillance and the tracking systems and everything. It's crazy to think about.
and then there's, social media. I mean, can you imagine the frenzy? Twitter, Facebook, everyone would be, an armchair detective speculating about the suspects, probably spreading all kinds of misinformation.
Right. And it makes you think, right, would all that outside pressure, all that information and opinion flying around, would it even affect the investigation or even the outcome of the trials?
And don't forget, back in 1937, I mean, the newspapers, they had a lot of power, right? They
Yeah.
really influenced public opinion. And their reporting, I mean, that could easily shape, the whole narrative around a case,
Mhm.
even before it even went to trial.
Yeah, it's like a reminder, right? Even though technology has changed and media and all that, the power of information and how it's presented, it can still have a huge impact you know, on justice.
Absolutely. And it makes you appreciate just how complex these historical cases are. I mean,
Yeah.
we're not just looking at, crimes. We're looking at a like a snapshot of a time and a place
Right.
with all the social tension and economic pressure and even cultural bias.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into these two cases, these really interesting cases from 1937, there's a lot to think about. I mean, we talked about, the challenges of rural law enforcement, the impact of the Depression, the possibility of bias in the justice system, and how media and technology, shape how we understand crime and punishment. It's a lot.
It's pretty amazing, isn't it, how two events, I mean, seemingly totally unrelated, a murder in the small town and then a heist, way over on the other side of the country can give us these insights into this, this really important moment in Australian history.
Yeah.
It is. It is. So what do you think? How would these cases, how would they be different if they happened today? Would the outcomes be the same? We'd love to hear your thoughts.
And I think that's the beauty of these deep dives, right? They spark our curiosity, they make us question things.
Mm.
and they invite us to look at the past in new ways. I mean, who knows? Maybe you'll even be inspired to, do some digging of your own. There are tons of stories hidden in history just waiting to be uncovered.